could difficultly be characterized as a development round completely, unfortunately. We have parts that, of course, may benefit some developing countries, and we really push hard for them. But it's true also that this round has been somehow hijacked by the developed countries' interest, and what we are seeing is not so much a rebalancing that we will like to see, but a slight rebalancing. And why are we worried also as Bolivia, and I put on perspective my words, is because the little gains that we may have in the Doha round maybe even evaporate even more from what developed countries are planning. And it's really sad to say that actually what they are trying to do is to get rid of development at all. It's true that the Doha round was very an awkward animal in the sense that when I first came here, an ambassador that I pay a courtesy visit, developed country ambassador, told me that one of the mistakes that they did is that they labeled this round development. For developed countries, it never meant to be really development. And the problem was, according to him, at least he was very sincere, he was going to leave, is that developing countries, we believe that it was going to be a developed round. So that was the main problem he saw. So what we've seen since the beginning, of course, they were thinking of just a round as business as usual. And what we are going is a very slippery slope going less development, even if it's labeled as development. And of course that should change. What we had, of course, at the beginning, and especially in the GAD, it could be characterized as a club of, very small club, of course, of dominated by white male transatlantic, actually, traders, and I'm happy to be women and from a developing countries to prove that things are starting to change. And why is this slippery slope going even a step further during the MCA? And that is what Bolivia is really worried about, and another set of countries that I will mention, is that all these words that you have heard from the other ambassadors, that means to make plurilaterals, to make alternative approaches, to have new issues, is a new way, again, to forget the little gains we had in the Doha development round, even the Doha development mandate, and to move away very swiftly and to engage in what they say 21st century issues. I ask myself always, is 19th century over? I mean, like, for me, it's like there is an imbalance that comes from the 19th century, from the 20th centuries, and they're asking me to go jump again to other issues that don't necessarily are the most important for rebalancing the trade system. I put it an analogy. It's like, for instance, if I was still a colony and they asked me already to make a treaty while I'm not still being independent. So what are they trying to do there? And of course, what they are trying to do is to go against the single undertaking, as was mentioning. And since nobody really has the courage from the developed countries' counterpart to kill directly the Doha round, they're just trying to put a little bit of pieces, maybe a little bit of trade facilitation, a little bit of NTBs, make a little package, and then to say maybe in 2 years, well, this is the Doha round. There's no way we can go further. That is the most we can do. So definitely what we can relabel now Doha round is these very few elements, and then let's move on. Let's move on to something else. The problem is that we haven't solved the main problems. That is the subsidies in agriculture, the tariff peak, the anti-dumping, and so many imbalances that we have. So against this backdrop and the possible consequences of what I just mentioned, a number of countries, sometimes it's called ALBA, but here we were just 5, so we cannot speak about ALBA in South America. Ecuador, Bolivia, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua put a paper just to alert and to say, well, we think that this is really what is happening. We are not just getting more development, we are getting less and less. And also, of course, for certain engagement procedural rules that are not a point here. And where is that we can see, actually, that this trend is going even worse? I have to say that maybe because I'm a relatively young ambassador that has relatively not that much experience, I was appalled, there is no other word, to see the results on the LDCs. I was completely appalled that one member from 153 was able to hijack and stop such an important issue as to have just a result that is very fair, just, and just has taken so long. So of course it could be the most powerful, and although it's in decline according to some analysis, it could be the most powerful. But it's just appalling that is in this 21st century, not even this issue can be solved. And if this issue cannot be solved, what hope do we have for the rest of the development agenda? For me, it was very clear. I mean, like that the political will of the developed countries is not there. And of course, you heard they are really mercantilistic. They are just going into very, very narrow agendas. But does it mean that we should just give up and then that the Doha round is so bad that we shouldn't fight for all? Not at all. In the contrary. And actually, I just wanted to make a point that was also made previously, that we have to keep on fighting for it, but we have to keep on fighting united. And something that makes me very sad when I go to other scenarios, because from small developing countries, we have to see different scenarios where we have to negotiate. And of course, WTO is not the only place where I have to negotiate. And where we see there is that we have the non-aligned movements. We can have the G77. I already mentioned once, actually, to developed countries that it could be great, for instance, if we could negotiate as developing countries at G77. They almost choke in WTO. And, of course, they were not very happy with that. So, basically, I think that as very good, well, not very good, but a strategy has been put in place by developed countries to divide us in WTO, and they have somehow succeeded, unfortunately. And it's the contrary that we should be doing. We are the majority. We have the numbers on our side. We should get united, and that's why I'm so happy that the Friends of Development paper came. Why is that? Maybe not because our friends from the right need the solidarity necessarily of Bolivia. They are, most of them, big enough to defend themselves. But because united, we can really move a development agenda. And also, and I have to say it very plainly, is that when they divide it in so much small groupings, it's very difficult for the small groupings. We belong, of course, I'm not going to do the whole list, but the landlocked developing countries, the G20, G33, that is not a specific division, the small and vulnerable countries. But can you imagine, for instance, the small grouping, the small and vulnerable countries, going directly to negotiate with the EU and the US? Of course, it's terribly difficult. It doesn't mean that we have all the same interests. in developing countries. But I think we are really stronger if we are united and if we can get together the best possible deal for all of us in the Doha round. And also in development. Why I wanted to mention that? Because we always hear that the majority has to benefit, but to make sure that the majority really benefit, we have to unite it and make sure that we have these results. And why is that? It sounds maybe a little idealistic, because we think that the first, second, and third priorities of our countries in the WTO should be development. Development as a broad issue, meaning not only the Doha development round that should be considered as just one step. We have to see development in the regular bodies, but also in the negotiation part. And that should be, I put it very succinctly in the speech that, that we deliver in MCA, that according to Bolivia, it was quite easy to see what the priority should be for the organization, and that will in the short, medium, and long term, and that will be first development, second development, and third development. And I know that is not completely, of course, in our hands to make that true, but if we unite enough and we push enough, of course, we're gonna obtain better results for us all. So it's not, and to answer some of the questions, of course, not to abandon the round. I will say go further, not to abandon development and hope in this round. And as it was wisely said, not to be just reactive, but of course, to be more propositive in the agenda of the WTO and in order. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you very much. We have heard a range of issues from a range of ambassadors. We're still going to hear some views from the experts, but I now welcome short comments and questions that you may have from the floor before we proceed. Professor Deepak Nair.
Thank you, Chair. I have learned much from the lucid presentations of the ambassadors. Even so, I have three questions that probably stem from either the ignorance or the innocence of a person who is an outsider to the world of multilateral trade negotiations in Geneva. First, is the Doha round dead, even if it is not quite buried? Or is it in cold storage on a life support system so that it might be brought back to life wherever possible by those who want to bring it to closure? Second, is it time for us to separate our thinking about the future of the multilateral trading system, as also of the WTO, from the Doha round and its agenda, which was defined at a time when the world was different, and its purpose, which was driven largely by the industrialized countries. So why is it becoming the box that it became? Third, what is the probability that developing countries can become proactive, not just reactive, to propose an agenda for the future? It is my view that everybody and their grandmother has plotted to place every issue in the WTO because it provides a legal right to retaliate, which has made the WTO much like an elevator that's overloaded. It's neither functional nor safe. Therefore, should we not attempt to think anew about a WTO minus rather than a WTO plus, with two essential objectives from the point of view of development? A, preserve policy space, that it is conducive to development, and B, and it's being progressively encroached on, and B, attempt to make existing rules less unequal, less fair, even if they cannot be made perfectly equal or perfectly fair. And that's really for developing countries to develop an approach. I don't expect answers, there's no time, but perhaps something ambassadors might reflect on.
Thank you very much. One more question, at least? Or is everybody so flabbergasted by what you heard? Also exhausted? Does any of the ambassadors want to give a short response to Deepak? Yes, please. Saga.
Thanks. I will attempt an answer, but I will try to do the ones I can. First, is Doha dead on life support or cold storage? It depends on your interpretation of the reality. If you have hope that you could still get it concluded, that is for some sections of the membership. For some sections of the membership, Doha is not doable. So the question is, do you go forward? I think that should be part of what, like when I say being proactive, that should be part of what we should be discussing. Because we are waiting for somebody to say it's either dead or not dead. But we should also be trying to understand what it means. And when you talk about being proactive again, for me, in terms of your question as the probability for developing countries to propose an agenda. Let's take, for example, at the end of the Uruguay round, we had an inbuilt agenda to continue negotiations for the progressive liberalization of trade in services and agriculture. Some part of the membership felt that we needed to enlarge the negotiating basket to enable them sell to their constituencies. And that complicated the agenda that led us to the round. Those agreements are still there. The provisions in those agreements are there. So the question for me is, have we ever sat down to look at the legal implications of this vis-a-vis our rights and obligations in the organization and start a debate? If you can't end the round, why don't we now say, well, look, we allowed you as special products, but it's no longer now possible. Or we allowed you this clause, the peace clause, to allow, so that agriculture will not come under DSU until we finish the round. But can we now invoke that? That's why I was talking about the issue of the jurisprudence in the organization. We need to begin to be proactive in exploring some of these areas to see how they fit us. Again, yes, an idea of attitude. When I was doing the consultations for MC8, out of convenience, I said DDA and non-DDA. And I spent the whole of May to July hearing from developing country groupings that they didn't like the categorization non-DDA. You see, as a pocket lawyer, I would say the devil is in the details, not the form. If I say non-DDA, what is non-DDA? Let's define what non-DDA is. Rather than you spend your time telling me you don't want non-DDA as a form. And then by the time we came back after the summer to look at the real proposals, they didn't have time to come up with proposals. And on the very last day, they abandoned the agreement and sent all their proposals directly to the chair of the General Council, where we had agreed those proposals should go through the negotiating, through the various working bodies. So can you blame any developed country for that kind of failure? So these are things I thought we need to reflect on. We need to set an agenda for ourselves by understanding the issue. Then a separate system I don't think any of us can contemplate that. We have invested so much, we have benefited so much, and none of us can stand alone outside the multilateral trading system.
I did not say that, Ambassador. My question
I thought it was
can we think of the future of the multilateral trading system as also of the WTO beyond the confines of Doha round? It has become a straitjacket.
No,
That was my question.
That was part of the point I was saying. For instance, if you look at, I gave the example of Article 24. People are required to notify all these their FTAs wherever they do them. But even before they come for a waiver, they don't allow a discussion maybe in the committee that was supposed to review. They go to the committee and say goods and get a waiver. Or sometimes even if they get a waiver, they don't come back to produce the kind of information that you need to assess how the agreement is operating. So we, as developing countries, can begin to look at what the rules provide for us in terms of our rights and obligations to set an agenda. Fairness is not just the fact that the rules are there. Fairness could also be making sure that the rules are implemented the way they should be, so that even if you want a reform in future, you will know the kind of reform you are going to fight for. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to provoke any further listening.
Thank you.
May I just... I'll be very brief. I agree with my friend Fred about the Doha round being dead or in cold storage, depending on the perception. But we have heard the message very clearly, including in Davos, in press conferences, that with this agenda, with this mandate, it's not doable. You can draw any inference from that. The second point I wanted to make is that we can forget about those who keep it aside for the moment and think of a new agenda. But these issues, which are important for the industrialized countries, will come back again. There is no way investment, competition, government procurement will not be there. There is no way energy will not be there. And what about our issues? If we start adding our issues, it will again start sooner or later resembling the Doha mandate. So there is no going away or running away from these issues, which are of importance, some of which are important to the industrialized countries, some of which are very important to the developing countries. You put them in a new package, you start a new round, but the problem with starting a new dialogue is that there is so much of lack of trust now in view of what has happened in the past 10 years. Some of the developing countries, I may use a strong expression, were forced into joining the DBA. And when things proved inconvenient, as my friend Angelica has mentioned, that they made the biggest mistake, some of them are already saying, by adding development to the Doha agenda. Now, if that is the kind of perspective, then I think we really need to have a serious dialogue with all concerned where we see this. Because what I fear, and it is my personal fear, nothing to do with my country's perspective, that the way things are moving, plurilaterals, FTAs, and with trying to give the message that if you are not with us on this very ambitious, high-level, high-quality agreement, whatever it might mean, then you will be left behind, we will move forward, and that multilateralism will not get the kind of commitment that it used to get in the GATT days and in the WTO. That is the fear that we have. So we don't know, we don't have a solution, we have to have a dialogue on this, that it should not be relegated to the status. I may again be very unfair. Some of the UN institutions which have been turned into just institutions which produce papers. Thank you.
Thank you. Faisal?
Thank you very much. No, I think the questions you've asked, Professor, are extremely pertinent. We don't have a clear answer. As far as the first question is concerned, I think that, is the mic on? Yeah, as far as the first question is concerned, I think that there is no answer about whether the round is dead or in cold storage, and there won't be one, certainly this year. There won't be one. Because, you know, it's a multilateral organization, and until, you know, a large number of members, or in fact, because we have a consensus system, all members agree, we won't have an answer. But right now we are divided, and the divisions are sharp and deep, so there is no answer. There are different perspectives. There is no answer to that question. I mean, on the second question about whether the agenda is obsolete, I mean, I think that I agree with Jayant that even though in 2001 there were a different set of circumstances and developing countries had different views about the need for the round, but the reality is that some of the key issues in the round are still as relevant as they were then. Agriculture remains an anomaly. It remains an issue which is important for developing countries, and in fact has become even more important. Given that commodity prices are rising for the first time, we see investment in Africa, the potential for agriculture in many countries is much greater. And so the need to remove distortions, create a level playing field, even greater. But we also put on the agenda the need to rebalance the existing rules, because Uruguay round rules were clearly imbalanced. And of course, these were largely ignored in the round so far. But they are on the agenda. They are on the agenda. So our agenda, you know, our issues are still on the agenda, and therefore the agenda remains relevant. On whether we have made gains or not, I mean, clearly, you know, there has been a skirmish since 2001. But in that skirmish, we have made gains as well. We have suffered some losses, we've made some mistakes, but we made some gains. We have advanced agriculture, no doubt, compared to, you know, the history. We have moved some of the development issues. We've gained recognition for special and differential treatment. We have SVEs have gained recognition. There have been important gains between developing countries. We have learned to live with each other and recognize our differences. I know because I've been involved in some of these, and I chaired some of the negotiations on SVEs. And that's a very important contribution to the system, the architecture of the global trading system. And I think that has to be recognized. And that's why there is something in the current architecture of the round that should be and needs to be defended by developing countries. The reason we are stuck, I think, are twofold. The first reason we are stuck is that there is a genuine change in the balance of power. The US and the others couldn't get their way. If they could, of course, the round would have been concluded with the number formula which Martin has warned us about. But they would have gotten it. But they couldn't, because we were strong enough to resist. But secondly, the world has changed to such an extent that developing countries are playing a more important role, but also our own interests have become sharper. I remember in 2001, 2002, we couldn't define the word development in the context of Doha and, you know, what we were doing, developing countries. Now we know what our interests are. I mean, you know, that's why, I mean, I know Angelica is a bit skeptical about all these groups, but, you know, all these different groups have sharpened our own understanding of our interests. The LDCs know what their interests are, their issues are on the table. So do the SVEs, so do the cotton 4. You know, so we have begun to sharpen our understanding of what our interests are, and we put those on the table. So we didn't know this very clearly in 2001. I listened to many ministers, many ministerial conferences. We talked about development and implementation issues, but it wasn't very clear what developing countries' interests are. I think our interests have become much sharper because we are playing a bigger role in the global economy and in global trade. Now, going forward, I mean, it seems to me it's not in our hands. It's really the forces at play in the US and the EU, where protectionism is on the rise, And they really don't have the political will and support in their constituencies to move forward. And until we get that back, the system won't move forward. But we have an interest, and I think that has also something that has emerged. We have an interest in maintaining and building a multilateral trading system, but one which is fairer, one which is better rules, and where developing countries can feel more comfortable.
Thank you. Angelica?
Yes, thank you, Martin. I just wanted to make it very briefly. I'm just going to say my personal opinion on the state of the Doha round. It's not that. And actually, we have to keep on fighting. And we have to preserve the development elements that have been mentioned by others that are in the so-called development round. We have to keep on fighting. But I just... wherever we are in the different, of course, groupings and so on. But of course, it's better if we have numbers, as I mentioned. But I wanted to make a point that is more related with the discussions we had yesterday and the preservation of the policy space. I think it's difficult to see WTO in isolation. We have to see it not only regarding the economic crisis, the financial crisis, but what is more interesting for me is this space for alternatives and new thinking that we are having as developing countries that encompasses not only well, I'm too ambitious, a new architecture of the financial system, but also of the trade system. So I heard with very much interest yesterday presentations, and I have to say that they were more optimistic than myself. Personally, I'm quite concerned about a second dipping that's coming from wherever, and a repetition of the scenario of the 1929 crisis, that of course, the real crisis was announced in 1929, but some years later. So if we have a repetition of this scenario, and which the global difference that we are having right now, the reaccommodation in power, and we have this space for alternatives, is what we have to choose. And it's true that we're not going to solve the WTO problems right now. We are still not in this mood for these alternatives, but in a certain point as developing countries, we have to think bigger maybe and beyond the specific organizations that we are looking at. If, I'm just dreaming of course, but if we had to bring answers for a financial architecture, for a monetary architecture, for a trade architecture, what will be the South answer? I'm not speaking of just leaving behind WTO or other Bretton Woods organizations completely, but what will be our answer? What is that we want? Because what I'm afraid is that if this second dipping comes and if there are really a major crisis, there's going to be a crisis not only economic, of paradigms, of solutions, and we have to be ready to put our solutions on places on the forefront. And that's why I was so thankful for the people that participated yesterday in the debate, because they were already hinting to some of the solutions, mainly regionally and in the countries. And I just want to reinforce the point that was made, I think, by the UNCTAD, that at least in Latin America, for instance, we are creating our own currency, our own financial system, our own monetary system, at least at the ALBA, that is just some countries, a dozen countries, but we are looking to extend that to UNASUR, that is all the South America, and then to CELAC, that is all Latin America. That is partially the answer, to protect myself, to protect my region. But a point maybe will come that we have to think bigger than only our regions. We have to really think of an architecture that goes beyond that. And that's why I was so happy that the South Center had decided to invite the speakers of today, of course, and yesterday. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have come almost to an end of this subsection. I just want to conclude, and in doing so, I will then not take the space of the next session, my own speech then. I think the Doha round started on the wrong footing. There should not have been a Doha round. This is what Recupero also said yesterday. At the end of the Uruguay round, it was agreed that we would go further in agriculture because they had set up the architecture, but they had not really implemented it in details. The developing countries at that stage felt that they had lost a lot of policy space. In fact, policy space is what this fight is all about. We felt we had lost policy space in TRIPS, in TRIMS, in services. We had gained some policy space in agriculture, but it had not gone all the way, and that is what we wanted to do. Plus, to rebalance the WTO through the implementation issues and S&D strengthening that came about. The developed countries, however, having gained the victory of TRIPS, TRIMS, and services, and having not really lost much in agriculture, decided to move ahead since the sun was shining into the Singapore issues that they tried in 1996, and they failed in Seattle, 1999. So we had a confidence building period after 1999 in which developing countries put their implementation and S&D as the central trust building issues. Then they wanted to launch a new round in Doha. Ambassador Muchomo of Tanzania said, no, we don't want a new round. We want a development agenda instead. Therefore, they could not launch a round, and they launched an agenda, which they then called the Doha Development Agenda. They co-opted Ambassador Muchomo's LDC, saying that we want a development agenda and not a new round. And they said, we give you a development agenda. That is why they could not launch a round, and that is why they put development there. But as our friend Raghavan said in the Suns on the day this Doha was launched, this is an anti-development agenda. It is not a development agenda. They had put in the Singapore issues. We had put in agriculture, but that was an inbuilt agenda. And then we had our implementation and S&D. Now, as the round progressed, which was not a round, up till today it's just called the Doha Work Program. The big fight was on the Singapore issues because that would constrain our policy space even more. And to our great achievement, it was thrown out after Cancun that collapsed. And in the 2004 July agreement, it was put that these three issues would not come back as long as Doha is alive. And I think this is a secret of why the developing countries want to prolong Doha, because as long as Doha is there, they cannot put in new issues. If you proclaim Doha is dead, these three issues will come back to life: investment, competition, and government procurement. So it is to preserve this space and not allow an empty space in which the new issues can come back and fill more policy space. So this is the situation we now have. In agriculture, we have not won the victory. In fact, the modalities for agriculture and NAMA, in our analysis, and I have a paper on the table there, would make WTO even more imbalanced. So thank God we did not conclude the Doha round on the basis of the 2008 modalities. We have to thank the United States for that. They were so greedy, they had eaten 2 ice creams, but they wanted the third. And thank God that the countries that they were torturing, namely the India and China, but also Brazil and South Africa, stood firm and said, look, we gave you 2 ice creams and we are not about to give you the third ice cream. And this is what the impasse is all about. A very greedy United States stopping itself from being able to enjoy 2 ice creams, and we are able to keep the present system there. Will the impasse continue? Probably. Will they try to still inject the new issues? Yes, not only these 3 new issues, but also climate change. We don't mind discussing climate change if it reasserts that climate should not be used as a means of new protectionism, but they intend to put climate change there in order to clarify the rules of Article 20 so that you can take unilateral trade measures because of climate change. I think this is the battle of the new issue of climate change. On food security, of course, we have our own Raghavan has left his notebook on his seat next to Sanya's. Everyone ready? Okay, we don't have much time. Friends, we are going to resume this session. We have 3 speakers, as I said just now, each expert in their own area. So it's my pleasure to invite Mr. Raghavan, which many of you may know has been the person following the WTO long before it became the WTO, and in fact warned us about its becoming the WTO. He has been following the Doha round as well, from the beginning to the end. I wouldn't say end because it has not ended. And he will give us his perspective. A recent paper that he has written for the Suns is on the table, so please get a copy. It has a title that includes the word bicycle, so you know that's the article. Mr. Raghavan, please.
Thank you, Martin. President Makapa, Excellencies and friends. I'm sorry, in the morning panel session to the ambassadors, I came a little bit late. Not because I wanted to, but this is the state of the richest city in this town, in this country, that they don't even clear the snow and ice on the sidewalks. Okay, in New York, if you keep your sidewalks, after a snowstorm uncleared and somebody falls down, they will go and sue you, and you have to pay a compensation. Here, you don't have to. We have got real good governance. Martin was trying to refer to me as an expert. I'm no expert, excepting in one way, which only probably, if I quote the Urdu proverb, only my friends from Pakistan probably, and I'm not even sure whether Deepak will even understand it, so I won't quote it, I'll just give you the gist of it. And this is a proverb that dates back to the time of the Mughal Empire in India. Those of you who have gone to Delhi, sorry, my throat is a little bit bad, please excuse me. If you had gone to Delhi, you would have seen the Delhi fort, Red Fort. Now,